So, Brian, you and I have worked together for a long time. We've bought your products over many years and your wonderful tools. And so I'm very pleased to have the opportunity to chat to you today. And not just because you're such a nice chap, but also because it would be nice to be able to talk about some of the things that you have at Stonehealth, which I think are a big contribution to the conservation tools that we have for large objects. I know that you really probably sell mostly to the stone market, stone conservation and restoration, but we are particularly interested in metals and large scale metals particularly, and actually we're quite limited with our tools in this field for a number of reasons, because obviously we are mostly on site, and so that's why I appreciate your work that you do, because it helps my job be a little bit easier very often. But can we start off? I know your background very well, but just for other people listening in, just tell us a little bit about how you started the company and your background.
Okay. Well, thank you for those very nice comments, first of all, Lucy. You've made my head feel a bit bigger than it should be.
Not at all.
But no, going back into the 1980s, I came to a particular point in my career where I'd been working for very large companies and also one or two smaller companies, mainly in the toy and the textile field. And I thought I wanted to do something on my own. I'd made one particular company become a very strong company just through some product development. So I decided I'd break out on my own, but I wasn't quite sure what market to get into. But I did find that there was a company in Germany that was working with some consolidants for stone, and that became quite interesting. And I was talking to English Heritage about that, and John Ashurst in particular, who was very interested in what that did. But in the meantime, another company approached me, which said they had this machine for cleaning stone, and it didn't do any damage. So I went over to Nuremberg to the stone fair to see what was going on, and I was quite impressed by it. So I decided to arrange for some trials in the UK for the system which we call JOS, JOS as the Germans pronounce it. And so set up a demonstration in London, Bristol, Birmingham and Edinburgh. And the results were very startling, impressed me a lot. But what we found was that the contractors were saying, oh, this will be a new thing, here today, gone tomorrow, or we'll buy one if we need one. But it was the specifiers, the architects in particular, who were showing some interest. And I remember one of the first projects was a building called St John's, right opposite Waterloo Station. And obviously you had the old choo-choo smoke all over the building.
Yes.
A couple of 100 years old. And the architect asked the contractor to carry out some trials, which included the YOS. And when he came to look at it, the contractor said, well, that one's a bit too slow. And he said, well, I don't like that, but that one I do like. And he said, well, how much slower will it be? And he said, well, it'll take another couple of weeks. And this was quite impressive. The architect said, I couldn't care less if it takes another year. This building's been around for a few hundred years. It should be around for a few hundred more, just for the sake for you to get off site. So he specified it. And in fact, the job didn't take any longer than using any other method, but it was done in a very responsible way.
Yeah.
And strangely enough, that architect, or coincidentally I should say, the architect was also responsible for St James's Palace. So that was the next project that took place.
Lovely.
In the meantime, the cathedrals became interested, and so Lincoln, Salisbury and Canterbury, as well as Westminster Abbey, were starting to use it. So it really did become a big thing. It wasn't one of those things that's here today, gone tomorrow.
As the contractor predicted, badly.
Sure. But after this start realized then had a real company to do, and that's the reason why the company's been going for 30 years, but I've been involved for 33 years. And it was not really taken that seriously in the beginning. But after that first 3 years, when we realised we had some future, we formed Stonehealth Limited, and then started expanding away with this. But we found a problem with the company that was supplying us, and it was at the time when the wall came down in '89 that Germany suffered a bit of a setback, and the company that developed the EOS went down, unfortunately. I think it was partly due to rags to rags in 3 generations, where a grandfather who was a doctor of chemistry, he started the company. His son took over, who was also very diligent and hard-working, and then the grandson took over, and he was really only interested in things which were fast, and that was cars, boats, and women. And,
expensive hobbies.
was, and that's not the sort of attitude or type of person you want to run a company. So suddenly left with being without the supply of the most important project or the product that we had.
Huge setback.
It was a big setback and very concerning, but one or two of the companies in Germany that was supplying that particular company approached us direct, and we decided also to get some local supply, and so we got it up and going. Before this happened, the original Yoss nozzle did have a problem of, unfortunately, wearing out pretty quickly, and it was quite an expensive item. So together with the Germans developed a way of making it modular, so it could be, the wearing parts could be replaced, which made it a lot more economical, and that's where we then called it the Torque.
Ah, I see.
So that was a big step forward. And the first time the Torque was being used was on the British Museum around the old library when it was covered over. And the contractors who were using it said, we're finding that this is using less material, it's a gentler clean, and it's working quicker. So that was a big improvement over the Yoss nozzle. And so that was a big step forward. In the meantime, people were finding problems in removing paints. Now, sometimes the Yoss and then the Torque would remove paints such as lime wash, and also carbon, of course, but it wouldn't remove the more modern paints, which were flexible.
Yeah.
So in talking with a friend who I met through the business, a Dutch person, he said, Brian, if we can get temperatures up to 30 degrees, I'm sure that's going to destroy a lot of paint. So the next thing is we're looking at a system which was developed for cleaning industrial machines, etc., and it was working at 150 degrees. And we said to them, will it remove paint? Don't know. Well, let's give it a try. And it did. Paint just sort of came off very quickly.
Ideal.
In a very impressive way. So we worked with that company for a bit until they were taken over, and then they went a different way. In the meantime, we developed the systems ourselves, and we manufacture those now totally here in the UK. So the Torque and the DOF, between the two of them, will remove most unwanted matter. I'd say 90%, either one after the other or together, and the results are good without doing damage.
I've got to say, one of the things we really like it for, the Torque, this is the Joss Torque.
Yes.
I'm pronouncing it wrong, Joss. It should be Yoss. But
You're English.
one of the things we've found is that we use it quite often on removing limescale, actually, on fountain bronze, because bronzes in fountains, although they look magnificent with the water cascading over them, it's often when the the water supply is turned off and on periodically, that you get a lot of limescale developing and hardening, because what happens is it starts to bake in the sun.
Yes.
And although the limescale deposit isn't always reacting necessarily with the bronze, it's relatively inert, it does really claw into the cast surface of the sculpture, and so gosh, it's hard to get off. And we don't want to use any chemicals, because particularly acidic chemicals for limescale, because if it goes through that limescale layer and it gets to the patina underneath, it will strip that patina. Yeah. And so actually we found it really, really good for being able to, in quite a controlled way, thin out those limescale layers, because obviously you're using quite a similar aggregate, aren't you? So you can do. I know that you've the aggregate sort of differs depending on if you want it coarser or thinner, but finer. But we've had quite a lot of success with that. So I've been, and it's useful for corrosion removal as well. But certainly limescales are really one of those ones that very few tools will deal with very well. There's all sorts of difficulties with limescale.
Yes, I can understand that, and I mean, obviously, the in hard water areas, that's likely to build up even quicker, and as you say, it calcifies, and that becomes very hard. And what's nice about the torque is that it buffs away. It's like wearing it away in a controlled way. Unlike grit blasting, where the grit goes directly at the surface in quite an aggressive way. Yeah. This rotates on the surface and it buffs it away, and you can remove that those calcium deposits and come down to what I understand you want is the bronze to look like a dirty penny, and to leave that patina in place.
Well, it certainly depends on what the original finish was. Quite often, fountain statuary is quite diverse in its intentional finish, or in the finish that has adapted. It's just that lovely aspect of having the control there, not to be able to stop and investigate. Where are we? What have we got here? Is this point we want to stop? Whereas obviously, if you have another tool which just sweeps it all away, you haven't got that thinking sort of transition period, really.
Yes. What's the important thing is, as you say, you're able to take away what you want to take away and leave what you want to remain or retain. I remember sort of layers and layers of old paints, and it was like taking one layer off and then the next layer off, and it was like steps. You could see the history of this particular piece of stone and what paints have been put on it over a period of time, and that just shows what sort of control you've got.
Well, that's one of those it's the kind of thing that conservators dream of, to be able to have ultimate control, really.
Yes, but it's very much down, I mean, whilst we may be able to provide good systems and products, it very much comes down to the person behind that machine or that product who applies it.
Absolutely.
You can give a good car to a good driver and they'll drive even better, but if an idiot's behind a good car and goes up and down curbs and knocks down lampposts, etc., you can't blame the manufacturer, and that's why we place so much emphasis on the training of operatives. Yeah. And I know it applies more to stone and masonry in general, but that's the reason why we've now adopted this system of having an approval system with a rosette awarded, which does at least give specifiers some form of assurance that they're at least, hopefully, will get a better job done.
Well, absolutely. And I think, though, the thing is that I think anyone with an ounce of common sense knows that that's the case with all treatments, especially on historic objects. We've learnt that from the past, haven't we, with all the disasters that have happened, that you really, if you have somebody with experience and knowledge, that they aren't going to be gung-ho with a technique that they're not familiar with. It's not within their, it's not within their scope to do that, because otherwise they will not be what they're signing up for, which is the kind of ethics and principles that we try to uphold in conservation, obviously. But I don't think you can level that criticism just at your own tool. I think damage can be done by lemon juice can damage bronze very severely. Coca-Cola, and I mean, no one thinks to be trained in drinking Coca-Cola, but the damage I've seen done by it is quite extensive. So yeah,
just shows how carefully one has to be.
Absolutely. But tell us a little bit about the business model, Brian, because I'm quite interested in conservation companies, and I know that yours is it's I think a company that thinks quite a lot about the way it operates, not only with its staff but generally. It's quite an ethical company. And I kind of like that, because I remember a long time ago somebody saying to me, "Oh, don't you think there's a kind of disconnect between making a living and also being an ethical company?" And I think that I don't agree with that, and I argued the case. But let's hear what you say.
Well, good for you in arguing that, because I mean there are a lot of people that just think that a company is there to make money and to do so at any cost. Now, I've always found from experience that if you look after a customer well, they become a loyal customer. And sometimes even if you've got a discontented customer, if you put right what's wrong, they become an even much more loyal customer. And you use that word ethical, and that's a very important matter to us, because we try to take a responsible way with not only the commercial side of the business, but also the responsibility for making sure that people do the job properly. And I've had people who have said to me, "Can I buy so-and-so?" And then I've found out what it's for. And I've said, "No, it's not appropriate for that." And they said, "Well, we'll still buy it." And I said, "Well, no, I'm not prepared to sell it to you on that basis." So there are people who would say, "Well, you've sold it, so what does it matter?" And I remember one of the companies was making some chemicals for us in Holland, was taken over, and the person who was running the business, he showed us how certain things worked. One of them didn't go that well, and he said, "Well, it doesn't really matter as long as you've sold it." And I was disgusted with that sort of approach.
Yeah.
Because you want to build up a good reputation, not only with your customers but with your staff as well. And I always remember back in my days with textiles, one of our large customers in the UK, this was an Italian company, but one of the large customers in the UK was John Lewis. And going to their offices, there was a notice up to say that we regard our suppliers as important to us as our customers. So if there's anything wrong, please let us know. And I think that's quite a challenging thing to put over to people, because there are times, as I say, when you don't sell something, you don't want to sell it to them because it's not appropriate, but they come back because they know you're taking a responsible approach. And if you do say that that is the product for doing something, then they're more likely to listen to you rather than being sold to. And that's something that I've always felt. As a company, we prefer people to buy from us rather than us selling to them.
That's definitely a very personal relationship you're building then, because they're able to trust you. I think that's even though it's being in your case particularly, it's being done for the best intentions, I also think it's a good business strategy anyway, because if people can rely on you, they're not going to feel that you're not going to lead them in the wrong direction, and in the long run that's got to be better for them as being using the products. How does it benefit anybody to have that short-term thinking? I can't see it myself.
Well, I think there's been situations and examples of companies that have actually taken that more aggressive approach, and they haven't lasted that long.
Yeah, for sure. So you've
I,
also diversified, though, haven't you? Because you have many products as well. I'm always interested to have a look at new products coming out in the market, and you've got quite a range now.
Sure. In fact, as I said earlier, 90% of the unwanted matter can be removed either with the OS or the DOF, either separately or together. And there's a 10% where one does need to revert to other methods, such as chemicals. And again, we try to take that ethical, responsible approach in having products which are safe for the environment, the person, and anything else and the building itself, so you don't want to do any harm. So we try to do that. We've got another company in Holland that produces some very good poultices under our own specification, and these seem to work very well, such as for the removal, in your case on metals, to get rid of the oxidation and on bronze, etc., and also iron moulds as well. And also the salt is a big problem, as poultices for poulticing out salt.
Absolutely. We do like the cuprid, which I know is the poultice that we use on to remove the copper staining that you get, particularly on plinths and obviously on statuary that isn't being maintained, which it always should be, but often isn't. And so then not only is the statue degrading, obviously, but the impact on the plinth or the surrounding stone on a building is incredibly negative, visibly anyway.
Particularly when it's just being cleaned.
Yeah.
If you've got some carbon or some other soiling and you remove that, say on Portland stone, and all of a sudden everything looks green.
Everyone's shocked.
And then even with the cooperage, you may need to use 2 or 3 different applications, because sometimes that gets way down into the surface.
Oh yeah, absolutely. But there's no magic bullet with anything, is there? As far as I've come across, you can't do anything in one hit.
No, and it's all trial and error. We say to people, it may be the answer to your question, but try a small area in an inconspicuous place to see if you get the results you need, before going on to doing something which is staring you in the face.
So you must be doing quite a lot of development work at Stonehealth. You don't see, because I mean, we've all got to eat, so we've always got to deal with current projects that are on the docket, but there also seems to be quite a lot of forward thinking in what you're doing.
I think that's necessary. I always think that it's a company needs to move forward in order to stand still. That sounds a bit funny, but there's always a natural wastage and a moving on. Customers come and go, and you need to find new customers and new products as well to actually just stand still.
Absolutely.
Yes, we do, both on the mechanical side. I mean, we've got an interesting new development going on at this moment. It's been held up by some sort of technical hitch, but we had hoped to launch it back in July, but it probably won't come out until next year now, because we do want to make absolutely sure that is going to work properly and reliably before it's put on the market, because we don't want people to feel let down.
Well, no, I mean, I suppose, though, there'll be some beta testing first, I would imagine, getting feedback from people who, without marketing it properly, that kind of thing. I think that's always great advice. I always try to, even though it's always a hard thing to ask, what did you find wrong with it? Sometimes the answers are not like as you'd like, but on the other hand, if you just swallow the pill, you can often actually advance quite a lot from that.
I agree.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, Brian, it's been lovely talking to you. I know that we're going to be we use the DOF nearly every day with our treatments. A lot of our bronze work, it's the initial stage nearly always, particularly for restoration projects, and it's you know, our DOF machine's been a real workhorse. It really does a lot of hours. So, you know, it's sort of a friend as well as sort of definitely one of the team. So, you know, we've been really pleased with it. But thank you for taking the trouble. I should say that Brian has been a very good sport, because he has had to record this interview a second time owing to my inability to manage to capture it the first time. I had a tech gremlin interfere with the interview. So I thank you in particular, Brian, for having the patience to do it again.
My pleasure. We got there in the end, Lucy.
We did. Nice to speak to you.
All the very best to you.
Take care. Bye.
You. Bye.